Okay, let's get started. This is part 3 in my series of Allreds in the American Revolution. Tonight's feature is about the militia, a Minuteman, maybe 2, and some tombstone mistakes. Just because it's carved in stone, can you really trust it? The previous tombs in this series were the Battle of Allreds, which took place on May 16th, 1771. Unfortunately, that was pre-Revolutionary War, but we still had Allred ancestors who participated. The first of this series was Allreds on the home front, and we talked about the Battle of Moores Creek Bridge, which took place in February 1776. Part 2, we talked about 4 brothers who fought at the skirmish at the trading ford. And we talked about the Allred cousin, Allred ancestor, who fought at the Battle of Kings Mountain. Before we get started talking about our Allred ancestors, I want to give you some information on Revolutionary War pension applications. Not every veteran had an opportunity to file for a pension. The reasons are simple. When the war started, the Congressional Congress and the government was in its infancy. You don't decide to start a new country and immediately have the people in place to run it. You also don't have a bank account. So one of the first things our new Continental Congress had to do was figure out how to pay the soldiers and if they should offer a pension. By August 26, 1776, they passed the first law, the First Pension Act, which allowed for pensions for soldiers and sailors who had been injured in the service of the colonies and were therefore incapable of earning a living. All others were excluded. On May 15th, 1778, a new pension act was passed that was meant to encourage officers and enlisted men to serve for the duration of the conflict. This resolution allowed half pay for all officers and a set gratuity of $80 to all enlisted men who remained in service until the end of the war. On August 24, 1780, the Continental Congress passed the first act offering pensions to widows and orphans of the Revolutionary War soldiers. Now remember, the war started 1776. 4 years after the war passed, they were finally able to, or at least thinking about, offering help to the widows and orphans. The war ended in 1783, but it took several years until 1818, and Congress passed a pension law that granted pensions to Revolutionary War veterans who had not been disabled. These pensions were based on financial need, but were granted for life. The Revolutionary War veterans had to prove that they needed this money to survive. So many applicants applied that it almost bankrupted the young nation. Congress immediately amended the law in 1818, again in 1820, and again in 1822. And this made it very confusing for anybody, the Continental Congress and the veterans, to figure out who really qualified and who didn't. On June 7th, 1832, the final Pension Act was passed, and this gave full pay for life. Officers and enlisted men who had served for 2 or more years, and partial pay for service of 6 months to 2 years. Now, as we proceed, you'll learn that militia service in North Carolina was a 3-month term. This means any of our ancestors who served 1 term of militia during the war, officially they were veterans, they served, but they would not qualify for a pension. To add to our veterans' problems, the war years were 1776 to 1783. That final Pension Act was passed in 1832, 49 years after the war ended. This meant that 20-year-old man in 1776 was now 76 years old. That 20-year-old man at the end of the war in 1783 was now 69 years old. This is at a time period when the average male lifespan in America was 60 years. Most of our veterans had already died. Those who were still alive were old men with fading memories, and many had lost that paper documentation proving their service. To add to the problem, there was a fire in the War Department on November 8th, 1800. So any military records that were stored there, any payroll records, any bounty land warrants, any records at all dealing with the Revolutionary War that were stored in the War Department were destroyed in that fire. And how can you prove your service if you don't have paper documentation? We're going to talk about 2 of our ancestors tonight. The first one is Elias. Elias was the son of Thomas, who was the son of Solomon. Elias died in Hall County, Georgia. He's buried at Bethlehem Baptist Church in Lula, Hall County, Georgia. And these are pictures of his tombstone. Notice it says he fought in the Georgia Cavalry, Revolutionary War. He was born 1758 and died 1840. Carved in stone. How many of you have heard that phrase? It has to be true. It's carved in stone. In this case, no, it's not true. How do I know? Let's proceed. In November 2000, I led a group of Allred cousins on a sightseeing and research trip to Georgia. And while we were there, we met David Allred and his sister Jackie Allred Cooley of Gainesville, Georgia. And they were our guides they took us out to Bethlehem Baptist Church and showed us Elias's grave. While we were there, David and Jackie explained that their aunt, Martha Allreds had placed the tombstone on Elias's grave in the 1950s. 1950s. The tombstone says he died in 1840. So some 110 years after he supposedly died, his descendant placed a tombstone on his grave. When Elias died, so the story went, there was no marker on his grave. But there was records, church records, that described his burial and where the burial was at within the graveyard. Using that information, Martha Allreds placed the tombstone on what she thought was his grave. And she used the very best information available to her at the time. But let's explore whether or not he really served in the Georgia Cavalry and whether or not he died in 1840. In Elias's Revolutionary War pension application, he stated he was first drafted into service December 1st, 1780, for a 3-month tour under Captain John Hines, which was a company of horse, and he furnished his own horse. This is our documentation that Elias served in the Randolph County Militia. There were 5 units within that militia, each with its own captain. Elias served under Captain John Hines, and yes, it was a cavalry unit. He describes his experiences during the war, and that includes when he was ordered to protect Morgan's army as they crossed the Yadkin River. This is the skirmish at Trading Ford that we talked about during the last presentation. This is the skirmish that Elias and his 3 brothers, James, John, and William, fought in. He states, when we reached Salisbury, we found Colonel Morgan with his army marching through the town. The company of cavalry I belonged to, together with about 80 of his riflemen, that's Morgan's army, were left to guard until the main army could be ferried across the Yadkin. Just about the time the last baggage wagon got on board the flat, that's the ferry, a party of Wallace's men, that's Cornwallis, said to be about 1,000, came upon us. We fired 2 rounds and retreated, and on the next day joined Colonel Littrell and marched to the barracks, and in 2 or 3 days was discharged. That's Elias's description of the skirmish at Trading Ford. Those of you who have been in the military and maybe even have been to war, try to imagine a militia unit, I'm going to guess maybe 25 to 40 men, along with about 80 regular soldiers on one side, and on the other side, about 1,000 redcoats. It's a very uneven battle. But as we know, the Americans won. Elias continued by saying, just a few days after getting my discharge, I substituted in place of a man by the name of John Sutton for a 3-month tour of duty in the cavalry again, and under the same officers. So once again, he was in the Randolph County Militia, serving under Captain John Hines in the cavalry unit. We marched to and fro through the state of North Carolina, keeping down the Tories. And it was in one pretty smart skirmish with the like which was commanded by Colonel Fanning, a noted Tory. Now, this is David Fanning, who you've heard me talk about in the previous presentations. David Fanning, the colonel, the Tory, who wreaked havoc and horror upon central North Carolina. Elias says, I think this tour of duty commenced about the 1st of April, 1781. Now, based on his statements, when this second tour of duty started, and the fact that he says one pretty smart skirmish with the like of David Fanning, of Colonel Fanning, after looking at the battles and the skirmishes that I know Randolph County's militia was involved in, my guess, and it's only a guess, is he was talking about the battle at Cox's Mill. You can easily Google that to learn about it. Yes, one pretty smart skirmish was a good description of that battle. Elias continued saying, having served out this tour of duty, I, with several others of the same company, agreed to stand as what was termed Minutemen, subject to the call of the same captain, and was frequently called on and was out sometimes 2 or 3 days at a time. So after serving 2 tours of duty in the militia, Elias spent the rest of the war years as a Minuteman. He and several others of the same company. I wonder if his 3 brothers were also Minutemen, but I couldn't find any records to prove that. What skirmishes and battles could he have been involved in? As I stated in the previous presentation, most of the war years were calm for North Carolina. Prior to October 1780, most of the battles took place in the northern states or south in Georgia and South Carolina. But in 1781, 1782, North Carolina was the center of the action. Cornwallis was marching through the state. Morgan, Greene were trying to stop that march. There were lots of battles, lots of skirmishes, and in any one of them, Elias could have been fighting. Some of the battles and skirmishes that have been documented Randolph County's militia fought in are listed here. Now keep in mind there were 5 units within Randolph County militia. One of them was the unit that Elias was in with Captain John Hines. I do not know which unit was at which battle. All I can say for sure at this time is Randolph County's militia was involved in these battles and these skirmishes. Look at the dates. April 1781, May 1781, September 1781. Pretty good battles. September 13th, 1781, the Battle of Lindley's Mill. October 19th, 1781, Cornwallis and most of his army was at Yorktown, Virginia, and they surrendered to General George Washington. which in effect ended the war. However, there was no CNN, there was no Fox News channel, there was no cell phones, Twitter, email. Word that the battle, that the fight was over, that Cornwallis had surrendered, took time to spread. That combined with the fact that a lot of the loyalists and the Tories, including Colonel David Fanning, refused to give up the fight. The North Carolina was still a hot spot. There were still battles and skirmishes after Cornwallis' surrender in March of 1782. The battle at Belfast Plantation, I know for a fact that Randolph County Militia Unit headed by Andrew Balfour fought at that battle because Andrew Balfour himself was killed. March 1782, Randolph County Courthouse. May 1782 at Andrew Hunter's plantation. The last battle documented that Randolph County Militia fought in, really a skirmish, was September 22nd, 1782, almost 11 months after Cornwallis surrendered. And that was at Faith Rock. Now, those of you who have been to North Carolina, who live here, or have been to the reunions and have gone on the tour of historic sites and Allreds sites, and those of you who have looked through the tour book, which is on my website, have learned about Faith Rock and how our Allred ancestors were involved, especially William Allred, who was just upriver from Faith Rock. Just because Cornwallis surrendered doesn't mean the war was completely over. With his surrender, it was time for the politicians to get involved. And it took time to hammer out all the details. On September 3rd, 1783, almost 2 years after the surrender, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and finally, officially, the American Revolution was over. The American colonies were officially their own country, United States of America, and no longer under British rule. So the tombstone says he fought in the Georgia Cavalry. Is that correct? No. Elias himself in his pension states, I was living in Randolph County, North Carolina when called into service. I remained in the state of North Carolina until the year 1815, and then removed to the state of South Carolina, Pendleton District, remained there until the year 1827, removed to the Hall County, state of Georgia, where I now live. This is our proof that that part of the tombstone is wrong. Now, how on earth did Martha Allred Payette come up with the idea that he served in the Georgia Cavalry? I don't know. Nobody knows. But my guess is she saw some of the pension payment paperwork. She knew Elias lived in Hall County. He knew he died in Hall County, Georgia. He may have seen the pension paperwork that clearly states he was in Hall County, Georgia when he applied for his pension, and when he received his payments. Paperwork on the left details some of his payments. The paperwork on the right is a statement from the Treasury Department that clearly says Elias Allred was a pensioner on the roll of the Savannah, Georgia agency. It's easy to see how Martha Allred Payette may have gotten confused and mistakenly thought that he served in the Georgia cavalry instead of Randolph County, North Carolina. He wasn't the only researcher to make that mistake. In 1931 and later in 1932, two of our Allred cousins, Ewell Allred and J. Urban Allred, both of Utah, sent letters to the War Department asking for copies of Elias's pension application. Both stated that Elias served in the Georgia line. But as we now know, he spent his entire military career in North Carolina, serving in the Randolph County militia. Going back to the tombstone, the birth date is correct. He gives his age in the pension application. The death date is wrong. Elias received pension payments each month until he died. His last payment was received on September 3rd, 1844. Now, some of you are thinking, well, you know, he could have died in 1840 and word just didn't get back to the General Accounting Office and, you know, it was an accident. No. The General Accounting Office had offices set up all over the colonies, in most every county. They would have known almost immediately when a veteran died. The last payment was made September 3rd, 1844. The payments were made monthly. He never picked up his October payment. This tells us he died sometime during the month of September, 1844. We don't know the exact date, but we do know the month and the year. So although it's carved in stone, it's not always correct. Now I want to mention something that a very talented researcher, our cousin, Donnell Griffin, she was my mentor and taught me a lot, maybe most of what I know about researching. And one of her firm rules was try to find at least 3 forms of documentation for each fact. In this case, the tombstone is one form of documentation. If you stop there, you'd walk away thinking Elias served in the Georgia Cavalry and he died in 1840. But by looking for additional documentation, you find the truth that he served in the Randolph County militia and he died in 1844. Let's move on to our second ancestor, John Allred. John was the son of William, who was the son of William, who was the son of Solomon. Now, although the final pension act was filed in 1832, John didn't file for pension until 14 years later. Now, why on earth did he wait so long? I don't know. But I can give you a guess. I think it's because in 1832, John was a very wealthy man. He was, if not extremely wealthy, he was definitely financially secure. He had no need for the pension. Maybe he was of the patriotic mindset that since he didn't really need the pension money, he wasn't going to apply for it. I don't know. This is just a guess. How do I know he was comfortable financially? Because when his father died in 1825, his father's will clearly states that John was going to receive 1/3 of all of his lands, plus an additional 30 acres. Now, John had the land. When John married, he continued to live on that land. When his father died, John was 58 years old. He was already married with a very large family that he was raising on that land. But by the time 1846 rolled around, when John filed his Revolutionary War pension application, as you will see, he was in failing health and had fading memory. Within 2 years of filing that pension application in 1848, court records tell us that his son Elisha and his son-in-law Solomon Free were in court trying to become his powers of attorney, his guardians. They declared John non compos mentis. They declared him incompetent, no longer able to handle his affairs. The court agreed. He was officially and legally declared a lunatic, which was a legal term meaning mentally incapable of handling his affairs. At that time, John owned over $1,000 in personal property. $1,000 in land and $1,000 to $1,200 in personal property. My guess is in 1846, when John decided to file for a pension application, it might have been because of his declining health. Maybe he was no longer able to work the farm and to provide for himself and his family. Maybe he needed that pension payment. But that's just a guess. I'll let each of you to decide that for yourself. John's pension application and the full application statement is in the handout, so I'm not going to go over all of it, just the highlights. But John filed on the 11th day of April, 1846. He stated he was a resident of the county and state, Randolph County, North Carolina. He was 82 years old, and he was making the following declaration in order to obtain the benefit of the Act of Congress. He wanted his Revolutionary War pension. He continued to state that he entered the services of the United States as a private and volunteer cavalry under Captain Thomas Dugan in the spring of 1781. For the purposes of soldiering and putting down Colonel Fanning. This is that same Tory Colonel, David Fanning, that I've mentioned so many times before. John stated he served until the next spring, and to the best of his recollection, was the rise of 1 year. Now keep that statement in mind as we move ahead. John stated, to the best of his recollection, his service was the rise of 1 year. By rise, he meant about. I served around 1 year. He entered the service when he was about 17 years of age and received a discharge at the rumination of his service, which he gave to his father, and it is long since mislaid. So he had no documentation of his service. Just have to take his word for it. He continued by saying he relinquished every claim whatsoever to a pension or annuity except for the current, except for the present. He only wanted the Revolutionary War pension from the Act passed in 1832. He stated that from old age and infirmity of body and memory loss, he cannot state in detail his Revolutionary War services as might be expected or required by the rules of the War Department, and perhaps ought to have presented his claim for pension long since, and should have done so. He already knew he couldn't prove his service. He hoped by swearing an oath, putting his hand on the Bible in front of a justice of the peace, that the commissioners who looked over these pension applications would take his word for it. He was an old man in failing health and obvious mental problems, perhaps dementia, maybe Alzheimer's. Thomas Branson, who was the Justice of the Peace, must have known there could be a problem with the pension application. So he made his own statement, again under oath, in which he stated that he was well acquainted with the above declarant, John Allred, and knew him to be a man of good and moral character and impeachable veracity. It is under the character of being a revolutionary soldier, and I am fully of the opinion that he was a soldier in the Revolution. And from old age, infirmity of the body, rheumatism, is unable to attend court to make the above declaration given under my hand on the 11th of April, 1846. This tells us that the Justice of the Peace fully believed what John Allreds said. It also tells us that John's health was so bad that he was unable to travel to court to file the pension application. So the court, in the form of this Justice of the Peace, came to him. John's brother William must have felt there may be a problem with the pension, with the application. So he included his own statement, swore an oath, put his hand on the Bible in front of a different Justice of the Peace, Howgill Julian, and William stated that his brother served as a private in the cavalry in the North Carolina militia in the Revolutionary War. He stated he was under the impression that he was under the command of a Captain Thomas Dugan. and served in the latter part of the war and was after one Colonel Fanning, who was opposed to American liberty. But John's brother William remembered that he served in the North Carolina militia. He served under Randolph County Militia Unit Captain Thomas Dugan. And he also stated that he served the latter part of the war and was after one Colonel Fanning. That's pretty much the same thing that Elias stated in his pension application when he described his service as a Minuteman. This makes me think that John was also a Minuteman. In addition to these statements, the Comptroller of Public Accounts for the state of North Carolina included his own statement, verifying that John Allred appeared on the payroll records as having received the following specie certificates. In other words, he received the following paychecks. One for £11 2 shillings, one for £13 13 shillings, and another for £6 8 shillings. That's 3 different paychecks. The militia was paid at the end of each term of duty. You served a 3-month term of duty. At the end of that 3 months, you got your paycheck. This tells us that John received 3 paychecks, so he must have served 3 terms of duty in the militia. Now stop and think for a moment. John said he served a rise of 1 year, around 1 year. 3 terms of duty in the militia, 3 months each. Do the math. That's 9 months. He may not have immediately been re-enlisted as soon as he was discharged from one term. It might have been a few days or a few weeks or even a couple of months before he re-enlisted. Using that line of reasoning, it's easy to see how his 3 terms of duty in the militia could have spanned over a year. However, the commissioners in charge of reviewing the pension applications and deciding if they were accurate or not, and if that so-called veteran was really a veteran and should receive a pension, rejected John's application. The Honorable Alfred Dockery issued the following statement. The application of John Allred has been examined and filed. This claim is asserted for a continuous service of 12 months from the spring of 1781. Did John state he served a continuous service of 12 months? No. He said he thought his service spanned the rise of a year. Dockery continued by saying this could only have been rendered in the Continental Line, evidence of which should be found in the office of the Secretary of State of Raleigh. The certificate of the Comptroller of Public was made exhibited, where payments showed that a John Allred and a J. Aldride, notice the spellings of the names there, amounting to 31.3, would have covered a service of nearly 12 months. The militia service in North Carolina was rendered in tours of 3 months and were not embodied for so long a period as 12 months at any one time. The comptroller's certificate therefore affords no evidence of the service as set forth by the claimant, nor does the testimony of the witnesses show that he rendered any service whatsoever. So his pension application was turned down. Is this the case of an overzealous government official who was nitpicking that application, looking for any reason at all to deny it? We've all run into those type of people. They look for any reason at all to cause trouble. I don't know. But the pension application was denied. John died without ever receiving official recognition for his military service and without ever receiving a pension payment. Following his death, his son, also named John, continued the fight. This letter, written in 1852, tells us that John was hiring a lawyer, John Neely of Washington City, District of Columbia, to continue the fight. To prosecute any claim that may be due or found the children and legal representatives of John Allred and Sarah Allred, in virtue of John Allred's services in the Revolutionary War. So at least one of John's children was continuing the fight. Now, this statement is also important, and you'll find out why in just a few minutes. But notice at the top, you can see my cursor, where it says he's one of the children and legal representatives of John Allred, a Revolutionary War soldier, and Sarah, his wife. Keep that in mind. John's wife was named Sarah. However, all of John's children died, never seeing their father's military service recognized. Doesn't that just make you mad? However, the daughters of the American Revolution and the sons of the American Revolution have recognized John's service. So have other researchers. Now, the graph on the right is a screenshot taken from the website carolana.com. That's Carolana, CAROLANA.com, which has documented the fact that Captain Thomas Dugan was one of the captains in the Randolph County Militia. And look who was recognized as being one of the privates that served in that unit. John Allred. So although John never received his pension, we know he was a Revolutionary War soldier. Now, I'll admit I had some issues. I wondered if there really could have been two men named John Allred who both served in the Randolph County Militia. So I did some extra digging and reminded myself that the John Allred who served in Captain John Hines' unit that fought at the Battle of Trading Ford who was the son of Thomas. That John Allred's wife was named Ruth Lane. This John Allred wife was named Sarah. She was Sarah Spencer. So yes, there were two different men, both named John Allred, who served in the Randolph County Militia. Further evidence is the memoir written by John's descendant, Priscilla Caswell Allred. This memoir, written in 1922, describes briefly the military service of John Allred. That memoir is on my website, by the way, if anyone wants to read it. This is a photograph of a portion of the cemetery at Grace Chapel United Methodist Church. In the foreground, you see a monument tombstone. You can easily read the Allred. It's hard to read who the two people were, but that was Patience Julian Allred and her husband William Allred. Beside of them was two flat markers, one for William Allred and one for John Allred. There's also a wonderful monument to honor the military veterans of any branch of service, of any war, who are buried in the cemetery. And in the Revolutionary War section are two names, John Allred and William Allred. Carved in stone. They must be there. But are they? Let's see. Close-up view of those tombstones. You see the larger marker on the left, the more modern tombstone. For P. Allred, that's Patience Julian Allred, her husband William Allred. On either side of that modern tombstone are their original tombstones. Very faded, very fragile, but they're still there. Yes, Patience and William are buried at Grace Chapel. And beside of them are the two flat stones, one for John, one for William. That William is the father of the younger William and John. But are those stones correct? And are those two men really buried there? Let's stop and think about it for a moment. Let's start with William. The answer is no. William is not buried at Grace Chapel United Methodist Church. Instead, he's buried at the Billy Trogdon Cemetery, closer to Cedar Falls. The picture on the left shows William's tombstone. Next to him is his wife, Elizabeth Diffie. There's a tree growing up between them. On the right, you see a close-up of William's tombstone. The death date is May 3rd, 1825. Now, you might be thinking, well, how in the heck does she know that that's William Allred's tombstone? I can think of a dozen men right now who might have the initials W.A. That's because when William died, before he died, he wrote his will on October 14th, 1822. His will was proved in court during the May term of court, 1825. By law, The family, the heirs, had to display the will in court and have it proved, accepted, as soon as possible so they could start the estate settlement process. Remember the date on that tombstone? May 3rd, 1825. The May term of court lasted for 3 to 4 weeks. So as soon as he died, somebody took that will to court and had it proved so they could start the estate settlement process. Those dates line up perfectly with the death date on the tombstone. So did John Allred, hit the wrong button. Did John Allred die in 1836, as it says on his tombstone? The answer is no. He died in 1825. Is he buried at Grace Chapel United Methodist Church? No. He's buried in the Billy Trogdon Cemetery, closer to Cedar Falls. What about John?
1363, right?
His pension application tells us when he was born. It gives us his age. But did he die in 1850? Is he buried at Grace Chapel? Let's take a look. Court records, and these records are included in John's estate record file, tell us that after his death, his children started a war with each other over their inheritance. They all wound up in court. And this court battle went on for several years. The earliest date I could find for the court battle is the first Monday in November, 1849. And the statement within the paperwork says that John Allred was deceased if he was deceased in November of 1849, he couldn't have died in 1850. So that part of the tombstone is wrong. We know he served in the North Carolina Cavalry, but the death date on the tombstone is wrong. Is he buried at Grace Chapel? I don't know. I don't think so. John was born, raised, lived out his old age, and died on his own land, which was located at the mouth of Bush Creek of Deep River. This land was located just across the river from the Billy Trogdon Cemetery. There was a bridge over the river. It was just a few minutes on horseback to get from his house to that cemetery. It doesn't make sense to me that the family would have taken him to Grace Chapel United Methodist Church. It was Grace Chapel Methodist Episcopal, I think, at the time, to bury him. It was 6 miles north as the crow flies. There's no records that John ever attended church service there. There's no records that he was ever a member there. Why would they have taken him there to bury him, when just a short distance away was the cemetery where his parents were buried, where other members of his family were buried? Now, the problem we have is we haven't found John's grave. The Billy Trogdon Cemetery has over 200 graves. Most of them are unmarked. This is a photo of that cemetery. The ones that are marked, most of them are just marked by field stones. Some of those stones have carving on them. Some of them never had carving on them. And some of them, the carving no longer exists or has faded so bad that we can't read it. It's unlikely that we'll ever find John's grave if he's buried in this cemetery. However, you never know. We're still looking. On occasion, some of us go out there and poke around. So keep your fingers crossed. But at this time, we do not know where John was buried. I just don't think he's at Grace Chapel. I presented my evidence. I'll let you make your decision yourself. Some of you have talked to me about joining the Sons of the American Revolution or the Daughters of the American Revolution. And this series has given you the information that I have and the documentation that I have on our Allred ancestors who were veterans. The handouts are all footnoted and cited and will point you in the direction of the documentation you need for your applications to these lineage societies. Unfortunately, our ancestors who served as regulators in the Battle of Alamance do not qualify for the SAR or the DAR. That's because the War of the Regulation took place 1761 to 1771. The Battle of Alamance was 1771. It was pre-American Revolution. The men circled in red are the ones that we know were regulators. Our Allred ancestors, who I have documented in the series as being Revolutionary War patriots, are listed here. As you notice, you read down the list, you'll see that some are DAR approved ancestors. I'm a member of the DAR, the Daughter of American Revolution. These approved ancestors mean that somebody has joined through these ancestors. They have their documentation already. The ones who are not noted as approved ancestors means nobody has tried to join through those ancestors. And right about now, everybody's squinting and trying to see that list and going, oh my gosh, is my ancestor there? Holy crap, there's 3 Williams listed. There's 3 Johns listed. How can I know which one was mine? I tried to make it easy for you. We all know Solomon Allred, born 1680 England. He had a son named William, who had a son named William and grandson John. Solomon had a son named Solomon and another son named Solomon, who had a son named Jonathan. He had a daughter. We don't know her name, despite what you might see online in various family histories. Her name is unknown, but she had a relationship with Samuel Finley that produced a son, John. And Solomon had a son named Thomas that had a large family, including 4 sons named Elias, James, John, and William. The men circled in the red are the ones who are documented Revolutionary War patriots. The men who have the black star by their name are the ones who have already been accepted by the Daughters of the American Revolution. They are approved patriots. The ones that do not have a black star by their name, that simply means nobody has tried to join using those ancestors. So for all of you Utah folks who descend from James or Isaac, who are the sons of William, William, who was the son of Thomas, is a Revolutionary War veteran. The elder William has a red star by his name. That's because I do not know, and to my knowledge, nobody knows when that William died. He may have still been alive during the Revolutionary War years. He might be one of the men named William Allred who received a pay voucher. If so, that would have made him a Revolutionary War patriot. However, I can't prove it because I don't know when he died. I don't know if he was alive during the Revolutionary War years or not. So my suggestion is that nobody try to join the Sons of American Revolution or Daughters of American Revolution using that William Allred as your ancestor, because the waters are very muddy and I don't think you can prove his service. If you want more information on the Allreds and the American Revolution, go to my website, look at the green arrow. You see the link for the Allreds in the American Revolution, links to the previous Zooms and their handouts, and soon this Zoom and its handout will be in that section of the website. Wander around the website. There's a lot of information about our Allred ancestors, and I'm adding more information just as quickly as possible. And I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you.
Great job, Linda. That was wonderful.
That was awesome.
Thanks,
I
Linda.
think it was pretty great also, Linda.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
You're awesome.
Thank you, Linda.
Anybody-
I'm real glad you enjoyed it.
Keep up
Anybody
the
have any
good work.
questions?
Any
for it?
questions? You're just mind boggled by all the information I gave you. Not a single person has any questions.
So I have a question for you. Since
What's
I come
that?
since I come through James Allred from Utah, so do we have to prove? How do we? So you say it's not documented that William served, or through the. I mean, it's documented he served, but not through the Daughters of the Revolution. So do they ask for documentation or what?
Yes. When you file your application to join, they're going to ask you to prove that your ancestor was actually a veteran. And if you'll go back to my previous presentation and the handout, I discussed how the John Hines military record is your proof.
Okay.
If you need help with that, let me know. The military record is on my website.
All right.
When a lot of the records disappeared after the war, maybe people lost them, maybe the house burned down. In the case of John Hines, he moved to Tennessee. Maybe somewhere along the way he lost the record.
Right.
But he did manage to keep some of them. And one of them is a list of the men who served in his unit. And on that list is William Allred.
Oh, that's great. Well, I'm going to fill it out and I'll probably have you help me.
Okay, I'll be glad to do that for you.
Thank
And
you,
Linda, as I was following along through the family tree, I've got almost
all of those, well, I do have all of the people that you talked about tonight on the Allred DNA family tree that I've been building. The link to it is in the next line down underneath the Allreds and the American Revolution on her webpage. Any of our Allred cousins out there that are not already linked up with me to, get their lineage connected to this tree, feel free to reach out to me anytime. I love working on the Allred tree and connecting every cousin that we can find out there. I've got all 4 of the lines coming down from Solomon on the tree. Obviously not all included yet because the tree only has 14,000 plus names on it. And I know there's hundreds and hundreds of other Allreds out there that are not on the tree, because even up here in Washington State, every couple of months I run across or meet another Allred. So if you're not already on my tree, please, drop me a line and, we'll get your lineage connected. That also causes me to expand all the other aunts and uncles surrounding your lines on the tree. So anyway, that's my pitch. Anyone's interested?
Very good. Yes, I highly recommend looking at Mike's family tree on Ancestry. The link is on my website. And if by some chance you find a mistake, remember we're only human. Let either Mike or myself know, and we'll be glad to correct that. However, don't just come up and say, oh, no, that's wrong. Come at us with some proof that it's wrong. Just like those tombstones. We need proof so we have the accurate information.
And a lot of the initial work was done in a very quick manner, because what I was using it for was to match the DNA match list from my dad's and my DNA through Ancestry. So when you're looking at the tree, those that you see an asterisk next to in their surname, those are ones that we got DNA matches with. So there's about 400 DNA matches to Allreds already found.
Hey, Linda,
Yes.
I do find your comment interesting about John being at the Trogdon Cemetery, because on my, I've noticed that the Spencers are married into the Trogdons and the Allreds on 2 lines of mine. So it looks like they both go back though to like William Spencer and the Sugg family possibly. But
Yes.
but yeah, John Trogdon that was married to Amy Lucas, her mother was a Spencer. So I didn't know if you've ever come across the Spencer family being in that area.
The Spencer family was, at least one branch of the Spencer family was in that area. So yes, you're on the right track.
Cool.
And Larry Allred, who I see popped up on here, I just spotted you. Hi, Larry.
Hi,
He was
Linda.
with
It's sure
us.
good to hear this from you.
Larry was with us. He had flown out to North Carolina from Utah, his home, and was with the group of us that found that cemetery. I think it was, gosh, Larry, when was it? 1996
I think it
or 97?
was, yeah, 96, I believe.
And that cemetery had been lost for several
Nobody
years.
really knew
several
where it was.
decades. Well, nobody knew where it was. We knew it existed. There were old records that told us the cemetery existed, but the people living didn't know where it was. The people who did know where it was had all died out. And one night, so the story goes, one of Eddie Clay Allred's friends was out coon hunting and literally tripped over a tombstone. And that's how the cemetery was rediscovered. And that was a fun day. But let me tell you, that picture of the cemetery, it looks worlds different when we discovered it. It was overgrown. It was a jungle. And if you'll go to the website, to my website, myallredfamily.com, and look at the pictures, you can see what it looked like when we first discovered it. And you'll see pictures of Larry out there working to clear it. Now, Stephanie Walker, Stephanie Seaton, eventually I'll get her name right, Dr. Seaton, asked me if I have any info about the family's time in the Pendleton district of South Carolina. The answer is I have some. Alice Allred Potmeyer has much more, and I'm going to try and pull that all together to place on the website. Mike Arnett had a wonderful suggestion earlier this evening that for a future presentation or a series of future presentations, we focus on the different migration patterns of the Allreds. Obviously, Elias migrated from Randolph County to Pendleton District, South Carolina. He stated this in his pension, and then to Georgia. That's one migration trail. Some of the Allreds went to Alabama, some to Texas, some to Indiana, some to Arkansas, some to Utah. They're spread out all over. Mike's idea was to do a presentation on some of those migration routes. Now, I can't do it all myself. I'm going to need each one of you to help me. But pull together that information for a presentation and eventually to make its way to the website. Now, my branch of the family was real boring. They got to Randolph County, North Carolina, and stayed there. That's where my grandfather was born. My dad was born in Chatham County, about a 30-minute drive from the original Allred family land. So my branch is real boring. There's no migration there at all. But some of you have wonderful stories of how your ancestors spread out across the country. So I'll be real interested in hearing from you. And I have your email. I have most of your phone numbers. I can find you and I will track you down. And I may ask you to help share information.
I have a question for Dottie. You said that
Yes.
Dottie, you said you were from the James Allred line in Utah. No? Did I misunderstand?
No,
Okay. Are you in Utah?
no,
Oh,
I'm in Florida.
I think that was
Florida.
Elizabeth.
Yeah, that was me. It was Elizabeth.
Oh, it was Elizabeth. Oh,
Yeah.
I thought it was Dottie speaking. What line are you from, James?
I'm from James Allred and his son Reuben Warren.
Reuben? Okay. And Larry, you're from?
I come from James's brother, Isaac.
You're Isaac. Okay. All right.
Who do you come
just
from?
curious. I'm from James's from James' son Martin Carroll that passed away before they came to Utah.
Oh, okay.
So if you ever meet anyone from that line, we're looking.
Okay, I'll let you know.
Great. Thanks.
Uh-huh.
Or if any of your relatives have diaries that happen to mention them, that would be good
Yeah.
too.
Yes.
Stephanie
Yes.
is my
Excellent
daughter.
idea, Stephanie.
Stephanie's my daughter. She lives in North Carolina and I'm in Utah.
I love hearing the stories of the migrations because some of us, like I said, my ancestors were boring. They got here and stayed here. Same happened to Sue Eastep. The same happened to Brandon Wright. Boring ancestors. They got here, they were old toots. They said, hey, I'm comfortable, I ain't going nowhere, and here we still are.
Yeah, they
Well,
must
I
have
had
loved that
stories
Trogdon
About how
Cemetery.
some of them- Huh?
Said they must have loved the Trogdon Cemetery. I think they're all buried there.
I'm glad
you
you
have to
stayed there,
wonder.
Linda. It's been fun to come there and meet you and have you teach us about what our family did there.
It's fun to show everybody around, and I love Allred is an obsession. It's the worst drug on earth. It's worse than crack cocaine or heroin or any other drug you can think about. I'm totally addicted to it, and I love sharing it. And I want you to become addicted to it too.
We're grateful for you.
Yes, we're thankful for all your work, Linda.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I'm going to
Any
sign
other
off.
questions? Bye, Flossie.
Bye. See you soon, I hope.
I hope. Any other questions from anybody?
So I'd just like to mention that when you're doing your migrations, I'm in Canada because a number of Allreds came up to Alberta.
Oh, wow. Now that would be a fun trail. Okay, you're on my list. I'm going to be contacting you.
That's fine.
When did they move? When did they move to Canada, Grant?
The first ones came, I think, around 1890, thereabouts. Then a few others. I'm only acquainted with one branch. There was more than one. My grandpa and his brother came up to Hill Spring area. That's in southern Alberta.
I have relatives there in southern Alberta also.
Yeah, because I think you mentioned that you came through Isaac, from
Yes.
James to Isaac, and then I'm from James Martin, and then to Ernest Rudolphus.
And Grant, I have you and your dad and Ernest on the tree. Yeah, that's, on Linda's website. So I have the Canadian Allreds already on here.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I participated in this a number of years ago, and I kind of let it slip.
Well, Linda has certainly
Keep in
reinvigorated the whole thing with her regular Zoom meetings and all. It's been really neat, and especially when people will put their cameras on so we can see who you are.
Yeah, what's up with
it
all the
makes it-
cameras being turned off?
Scary.
Turn those cameras on.
Yeah, there you go. Linda, I think we've gotten a good response to the idea of showing migration. So we'll have to work on that. And I just want to echo what Linda said, that it's going to take some effort on folks' parts. And so we'll be in touch with you about how we're going to do that. My idea was to take one of Solomon's ancestors, or excuse me, sons, children, one of his children, and follow that line out for a presentation in general form, show each generation. And by the time we get to our generations, we're going to be all over the place, but it'd be real interesting to see where the arrows go and forth and back and all. My family made it to California in the 30s, part of the Okie migration, though my grandfather claimed he came from Texas, the panhandle of Texas, about 20 miles from Oklahoma, but he was an Okie. And so we were part of that migration too.
Keep in mind, some of our Allred cousins never left England.
Oh,
So we
yeah.
might have some migration patterns from Lancashire, from Eccles Parish, where the original home church of the Allreds. There may be migration patterns across the UK. We do know that there's at least one member of our group who lives in Adelaide, Australia. There's one member of our group who's he's shy, choosing to remain shy, but he's paying attention. He's watching the recordings and getting the handouts, and he emails me from time to time. He lives in Hong Kong. How on earth did an Allred get to Hong Kong?
By boat.
So they're not all here in the United States.
Linda,
Yes.
in my military service, I've been all over the world. And I have met Allreds in Vietnam, in Japan, in Germany, in France, and of course, England. And there hasn't been a one of them that I couldn't tie into our line somewhere.
John Allred, who was our first DNA, what shall I call him, DNA project manager, did a study of DNA, and he came out with a statement, a report that's on the website, that states all Allreds are related to each other. There's only one family of Allred, and the DNA proves that. So except for the occasional adopted child or illegitimate child who may have the Allred name, all Allreds are related. And I kept that in mind when I was reading through Governor James V. Allred's family history. That's also on the website under the Texas section. Governor James V. Allred wrote a family history in 1961, and in there he described a visit to Randolph County where he met an Allred who was married to an Allred. But that was okay because they weren't related to each other. I thought that was really funny because we know, despite what they might think or despite what they might want to believe, all of the Randolph County Allreds are related to each other.
That includes the Allreds that use 1L.
That includes the Allreds that use 1L.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's the problem?
Different reasons. There was one story that came out, Melvin Allred with 1L, of Rome, Georgia, told the story that when he joined the military, the person filling out the paperwork for him just wrote Allred. And I don't know how many of you have been in the military, but once it's in military records, it's there forever. So even though Melvin pointed out to him that he had misspelled the name and it was really Allred, it went on in military records as Allred. And to this day, that's the way Melvin spells his last name.
Mhm.
Now, he had a brother, Bobby, who wasn't in the military and spelled his name Allred. So there's different reasons for the spellings of the names. That's just one story. That might be a fun presentation. I might have to pull together a presentation about how the name got spelled so many different which ways.
Linda, I have
There's-
another
Do
question.
you have the, yes?
Before Eddie Clay passed away, in fact, it was quite a few years before he passed away, Eddie gave me information on a group of Allreds in New York that were blacks. And prior to that, he gave me another list of Allreds somewhere there in North Carolina, I think. Either that it was in around Washington, D.C., who were black. Can you tell us anything about that?
Mm.
There are a lot of African American or black Allreds here in North Carolina and scattered around.
In Mississippi.
Mississippi, that's right. We just did a DNA study recently in the last few months for an Allred descendant. DNA proved he was an Allred, but he's African American. My guess is that all, at least most, are descendants of slaves owned by some of the Allreds. Yes, some of the Allreds owned slaves. And at the end of the war, when they were emancipated, some of those slaves took the names of their previous owner. Some of the slaves may have just taken the name of a man or woman who was nice to them, who was kind to them. After all, they didn't have real last names. So yes, there are a lot of African Americans named Allred. I'd love to have more participate in our DNA study and have Mike Kidd and Mike Arnett look at their DNA and see if we can prove that they really are Allred and who their original slave owner was. Those would be great stories.
I think it would really be great. It would be wonderful, really.
Yes, I totally agree. Now, my next presentation I had scheduled for February 15th, and it was going to be part 4, the last part of this series, talking about an Allred ancestor who was a Tory. But I have a lot on my plate right now. There's not enough hours in the day to do everything I need to get done. So I've had to postpone that to March 15th. So mark that on your calendar. That will be the next presentation. And we'll be talking about an Allred ancestor who was a Tory. Do any of you have other suggestions for future presentations? Don't be shy. Well, if you think of something, contact me and let me know. I'm always open to ideas.
Linda, before
Any
we
more
go,
questions?
I have one
Yes.
thing to show folks. So I'm going to share my screen, how the Allreds even connect into the Arnetts. Just a quickie for you all here. Here we go. Share that screen and let me, what's going on here? Why is that not? All right, here we go. All right, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay.
I see the brick
Wow.
wall.
Yeah, brick wall. That's my 4th great grandmother. The Solomon Allred, our ancestor Allred, is up here. My line runs through Solomon, Thomas, Nathan, Alfred, on down here, my mom. And there's another line, Thomas, Moses, Margaret. And then you follow this dotted line over here to a Margaret Allred, born 1805. She married into a Rogers line. Anyway, and it all goes down into here, into the Arnetts. And that all of this stuff is how the Arnetts and Allreds and others in my line are connected. But even the Allreds even married into the Arnetts. So I just wanted to show that since I had that out there, and thought you might find that interesting.
Wow, that's impressive work. Very
Now, let me
impressive.
figure out how to get out of it. There we go. Okay, stop share. There you go.
Yeah, you don't have to have the Allred last name to be an Allred. Look at the group here participating tonight. We've got Mike Kidd, Mike Arnett, Jordan Hardy, Wally Dixon, Brandon Wright. We've got all these people who aren't Allred by name, and yet they are Allreds. We got to remember those Allreds had daughters, and those daughters got married, but their children and descendants were still Allreds.
And some were adopted.
And some were adopted.
And some were forced into manual labor.
Yeah, some were slaves or the descendants of former slaves. Well, I'll leave you with a quick story. about DNA. When we first started the DNA project, and Y chromosome really was the only option back then, a professor at a university, and I'm not going to give you his name, he was an Allred, that's all I'll tell you, and I'm not going to tell you which university, but he was a professor of biogenetics, and he was teaching a class on DNA. And he was very interested in using the Y chromosome, which was the latest thing out, really the only thing out at the time. He wanted to trace his own heritage using paper documentation, which he had done, and then using his own DNA to prove that he was an Allred. So he joined the project, and he sent in his DNA sample, and he got back his results, and he was not an Allred. Even though he was a professor of genetics, he understood very well how DNA worked. Even though his last name was Allred, and he had the paper documentation, all of the court records, the birth records, the wills, the estates, the land records, everything you can think of, going back to the Allreds of Randolph County and Solomon Allred. Even though he had all of that, his DNA didn't match Allred. And he had planned to use this in his college class that he was teaching. So big oops. What in the world happened? He took a step back, and I did too, and a few others who were working on the research. We all took a deep breath and went back to those documents. His branch of the family, his ancestors, had left Randolph County. And some of you are going to recognize this migration route. They went south into South Carolina, Pendleton District, over into Georgia, up into Kentucky, back down into Tennessee, wound up in Missouri, where they converted to the LDS, the Mormon religion, joined the Mormon migration, and wound up in Utah. And anybody who studied that Mormon migration, whether you're Mormon or not, doesn't make a bit of difference. If you're a history buff like me, it is absolutely fascinating what those people endured. Somewhere along the way, in their travels, there's no way to document this, but somewhere along the way, in their travels, a lot of people died. They starved to death. Maybe they were killed by Indians. Maybe they were killed by bandits. There were some terrible things that happened along the way. The best this professor was able to figure was his ancestor must have been one of those children orphaned somewhere along that migration trail. And this orphan child was taken in by an Allred family, given the Allred name. There was no courts, no legal reason to go to court and prove that there was an adoption taking place. You simply took the child and raised him as your own, and the story was lost in time. And if this professor had not taken the DNA test, he wouldn't have known to go back and look and try to figure out how on earth he wound up with the Allred name, and yet DNA says he was not an Allred. So I thought that was a really interesting DNA story. I felt really bad for him because I knew he was working on this presentation that was going to go on for several classes to try and talk to his students about why they should get excited about DNA. The last time I talked to him, he actually did turn it into a presentation. And it was a popular one that he repeated for several semesters and over several years. All right, if nobody else has any questions or comments, I'm going to end the meeting. And I'll see you again on March 15th for the presentation on that Allred who was a Tory.
I have one more question.
You have one more question?
Yes, I do. In all the time that we've been doing DNA, I have failed to do that. If you would, when you get a few minutes, send me the information as to who to contact and how to go about doing it so that I can participate.
You see the two raising their hands. Mike Arnett and Mike Kidd are the co-managers of the DNA project, and I'm sure you're going to be hearing from them.
All righty.
Larry,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you have not done either Ancestry or the Y-DNA, or just you have not done the Y-DNA?
I've not done any of it.
Oh my
Period.
goodness. Okay. All right.
I'm gonna have to get my wet noodle out and beat him.
I'm just
Linda-
waiting for you. You got to come all the way here to Utah to do it.
All right.
Hey, Linda, I have, and maybe this is more for Mike Arnett, but I have noticed, like, based on autosomal DNA, like the ancestry DNA, how, like, my grandfather's DNA and I match at like 1,200 centimeters. But if you look at some of his distant ancestors, which I would need to tie to like the Allreds, some of those fall off for my autosomal, but stay on his. Like they're like 4th and 8th. So I don't know if it's just because the centimeters based on how far you got to go back sometimes to match. I don't know how that all plays into it, but I have noticed getting the older ancestors on autosomal seems to be a big help, especially if your DNA attaches theirs. Mike, I don't know if you have a.
Yeah, quickly, autosomal DNA, you lose half of it every generation. And so when you're going back to 5th and 6th great grandparents, it's gonna be really tough to get them. The Y-DNA will carry your male line back because it's passed father to son only.
Yep.
And that helps. But the autosomal does fail. And about if a person was born before about 1750, it's really hard to track them down using autosomal. It can be done occasionally, but not always. So that's.
Thank you, Linda.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Linda.
You're welcome, Sue.
Larry, what's
I
your
like
email
base
address?
coat.
Larry C. Allred 43 at gmail.com.
Larry C. Allred 43 at Gmail. Okay, got it.
And
Thanks.
I'll spell the Allred right. Don't get mixed up on that.
I'll try not to.
Okay.
All right. I'll see everybody again on March 15th. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, Linda.
Bye.
Great presentation.
Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Linda.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Linda.
Thanks, Linda.
You're welcome. See you later.